Film critics in the 1960s had a word for movies like these. Several words, actually, none of them printable. They were dismissed, ridiculed, and buried by the people who were supposed to decide what mattered in cinema. But here's what those critics never understood. They don't get to decide what lasts. Audiences do. And audiences kept watching these films for 60 years, long after the important films of the same era were forgotten entirely. So before we start, if you love these movies, you were never wrong. The critics were, and this video is going to prove it, one film at a time. The Leech Woman, 1960. We start in 1960 with a film that most critics dismissed as cheap exploitation and completely missed the point of. The Leech Woman follows June Talbot, a woman trapped in a marriage to a husband who treats her as an afterthought. She discovers a tribal ritual that restores youth, but at a cost, and she pays it, without hesitation or apology. The ritual itself involves orchid pollen and something far darker, the pineal fluid of a sacrificed man, extracted via a hooked ring. And her first victim? Her own husband, the man who dragged her to Africa in the first place, who had spent years treating her as an inconvenience. The film doesn't flinch from that moment, neither does June. Critics called it trash. What they were actually watching was a film about dignity, desperation, and the cost of being overlooked for too long. If you saw this one back in the day, you probably felt something you couldn't quite name. Now you know what it was. The Manster, 1959, released in the US 1962. Japan, 1959. An American journalist named Larry Stanford visits the mountain laboratory of Dr. Robert Suzuki for what should be a routine interview. Suzuki has other plans. He injects Stanford with an experimental serum and then sits back to watch what happens next. What happens next is one of the most gloriously deranged transformation sequences in the history of monster cinema. Stanford doesn't just become a monster. He grows a second head on his shoulder. The new head starts as an eye, just an eye, blinking from his shoulder blade, before developing into a full second face with its own personality, its own agenda, and absolutely no interest in Larry's marriage or professional obligations. The film was a US-Japanese co-production, shot entirely in Japan by directors George Breakston and Kenneth Crane, and that location gives it something most American B-movies of the era completely lacked. The Japanese mountain settings, the volcanic landscapes, the sense of genuine geographical distance, it all creates an atmosphere that the budget alone never could have bought. And the ending. Larry's body literally splits in two. The monster separates from the man entirely. The creature throws Suzuki's assistant into a volcano. Then Larry pushes his own monstrous half in after it. It is the most committed solution to a split personality problem ever committed to film. Reptilicus, 1961. Denmark, 1961. A mining company unearths a frozen prehistoric tail. Scientists thaw it, it regenerates, and suddenly Copenhagen has a monster problem it is entirely unprepared for. Reptilicus was a Danish-American co-production that both countries were quietly embarrassed by, and for reasons that are completely understandable. The monster is unconvincing. Its flight sequences were cut entirely from the American release because distributor AIP found the entire English-language version unreleasable and re-edited it heavily, including cutting all flight footage. The miniature Copenhagen crumbles like wet paper. The green slime attack is exactly what you think it is. But consider this. Denmark had never attempted a monster film before. This was their first, and rather than play it safe, they went all in. A giant creature, a major city, full-scale destruction. No safety net, no template to follow, just absolute commitment to an idea they believed in completely. That kind of courage is rarer than any film critic ever acknowledged. Reptilicus failed spectacularly. It also did something no Danish film had ever done before. Both things are true. The Brain That Wouldn't Die, 1959, released 1962.
What you see is real. What's done is done, and what I've done is right. It's the work of science.
The Brain That Wouldn't Die was filmed in 1959. It sat on a shelf for 3 years because no distributor knew what to do with it. When it finally reached audiences in 1962, censors had already cut it for being too much for early 60s sensibilities. That alone should tell you this film was operating somewhere outside the normal boundaries. A scientist's fiancée, Jan, is decapitated in a car accident. He keeps her head alive in his laboratory while he searches for a replacement body. The film plays this completely straight. No irony, no distance, just a man treating a catastrophic moral failure as a logistical problem to be solved. Jan, for her part, spends the film glaring at everyone with the most justified expression in the history of cinema. She develops a telepathic connection with Kurt, a hideously mutated failed experiment locked in the closet, and she has a plan. In a film full of deeply questionable decisions, Jan is the only character behaving with any coherent moral logic, and she is a severed head on a laboratory tray. That is either terrible filmmaking or accidental brilliance. The Slime People, 1963. The Slime People has a monster problem, not the monsters in the film. Rubber-suited creatures rising from beneath Los Angeles to conquer the surface world, which is actually a solid B-movie premise. The real problem is the fog machine. Someone on this production fell deeply, irrevocably in love with atmospheric fog effects and refused to stop. Half this film looks like it was shot inside a cloud. Characters wander through the haze, bumping into walls, monsters, and occasionally each other. Dialogue sounds muffled, as if the fog is absorbing the script in real time. Entire scenes exist in a gray murk that makes you wonder how the cast found their marks. And yet, there is something almost dreamlike about it. If you watched this as a boy, late at night, on a television with the sound turned low so you wouldn't wake anyone, that fog probably felt genuinely eerie. Memory has a way of doing that, of taking something objectively ridiculous and making it feel like it mattered. The Slime People mattered to a lot of people. It still does. The Creeping Terror, 1964. The story behind The Creeping Terror is almost more entertaining than the film itself. The director, operating under the name Vic Savage, which was not his real name, shot the entire film without proper audio equipment. Whether by accident or design, nobody ever got a straight answer, and then vanished before release amid fraud allegations. The footage existed, the dialogue did not, so the filmmakers hired a narrator to explain literally everything. He describes conversations you are watching happen. He explains motivations. He fills silences with the weary patience of a man reading a report about events he cannot quite believe occurred. You can hear the resignation in his voice as he trudges through each scene. Then there is the monster, a large, shapeless mass, essentially a carpet with a mouth, that moves so slowly its victims have to actively cooperate with being consumed. They walk toward it. They climb into it. They wait. It is less a predator and more a very patient collection point. The Creeping Terror is a disaster by every conventional measure. It is also one of the most purely watchable films on this list, because every single thing that went wrong somehow made it more memorable than a competent version ever would have been. Monster A Go-Go, 1965. This film was originally shot by Bill Rebane as Terror at Half Day and left unfinished. Herschel Gordon Lewis, the godfather of gore, bought the unfinished footage, shot additional scenes years later with a completely different cast, and released it as one film. That is why characters vanish and the plot makes no sense. It is literally two different films stitched together. Monster A Go-Go is the film that genuinely troubled the cast of Mystery Science Theater 3000. Men who had survived some of the worst cinema ever committed to celluloid. If you have seen it, you understand why. It begins as a monster film. An astronaut returns from space changed, larger, radioactive, dangerous. Standard territory. But then the film loses the thread entirely. Subplots appear and vanish without resolution. Characters disappear between scenes with no explanation. The editing feels like the reels were shuffled at random. And then, in the final minutes, the narrator delivers one of the most extraordinary lines in film history. The events of the film, he announces, may never be explained. Not that they will not be explained, that they may never be. The film ends by admitting it does not understand itself. It is the most honest conclusion any monster film of the era ever offered. Most of them pretended to have answers. Monster A Go-Go told the truth. Make of that what you will. The Navy versus the Night Monsters, 1966.
You expected this, didn't you?
Yeah.
When did you figure it out?
When I dissected one of the small creatures.
Killer trees. That is the pitch. Mutant carnivorous trees, unearthed from Antarctica and transported to a remote naval base, begin attacking the crew. The Navy versus the Night Monsters is a film that presents this premise with complete, unblinking seriousness, and that commitment is what makes it extraordinary. The monsters wobble. They sway in ways that suggest the men inside the suits are doing their best under difficult circumstances. The actors do everything in their power to look genuinely threatened by what are, functionally, angry houseplants. Every confrontation plays like a dramatic standoff between trained military personnel and a particularly aggressive ficus. And the film never acknowledges, not once, that this might be slightly absurd. These filmmakers looked at their tree monsters, nodded, and said, "This is cinema. We believe in this." And they meant it. That kind of conviction, the absolute refusal to wink at the audience, is something modern blockbusters spend hundreds of millions of dollars trying to manufacture. These men had it naturally. It just happened to be pointed at killer trees. Island of the Burning Damned, 1967.
I've found Stone's body. He's dead. He's been burned to death, just like all the others. The ground here is all scorched.
Island of the Burning Damned, also released as Night of the Big Heat, is the most legitimately well-crafted film on this list. And I am including it anyway because it earns its place in a way none of the others do. Directed by Terence Fisher, the man responsible for Hammer's greatest horror films. The film stars Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing. For those of us of a certain age, those two names on a poster meant something specific. It meant that whatever else was wrong with the film, and there was often plenty wrong, those two men were going to show up and give you everything they had. Every scene, every take, no exceptions. Island of the Burning Damned is proof of that promise. The premise, alien creatures causing a catastrophic heat wave on a remote British island, is genuinely unsettling. The atmosphere is oppressive and well constructed. The tension builds with real craft. And then the aliens appear, and they look like someone fried an egg on hot pavement and called it a creature. Christopher Lee stares at a fried egg alien with the full dignity of a man who has decided he will not be defeated by the special effects budget. Peter Cushing treats every scene as though the fate of the film depends on his performance, because for him, it always did. Watching two of the greatest genre actors who ever lived refuse to surrender to a terrible production is one of the quiet pleasures of 1960s cinema. They deserved better. They gave their best anyway. The Astro Zombies, 1968. We close with a film that contains mad science, robot zombies, Cold War espionage, a CIA subplot, and Tura Satana, and somehow still feels like something is missing. Nobody has ever been able to identify what, but something.
Rancho.
Director Ted V. Michaels operated on the absolute fringes of the film industry for decades and was proud of every moment of it. The Astro Zombies is his philosophy made visible. Throw everything at the wall, walk away before checking what stuck, and trust that the audience will find the value in the chaos. The zombies shuffle through scenes wearing masks from a discount costume bin. The plot ricochets between subplots like it's trying to avoid being caught. Scenes linger past the point of comfort, then cut away the moment something interesting might happen. But Tura Satana, whom you may know from Faster Pussycat Kill Kill, commands every frame she occupies. She is playing a character named Satana, a role Meekles wrote specifically for her after seeing her perform in Las Vegas, essentially letting her play the most powerful version of herself, and she plays it as though she is in a completely different, considerably better film. She brings an authority and a magnetism that the film around her does not deserve and cannot contain. Watching her navigate this chaos with absolute composure is one of the great pleasures of late 60s B cinema. The Astro Zombies is a glorious mess, but it is a mess with a soul. 10 films, almost no budget between them, dismissed by critics, ignored by awards, and forgotten by the industry the moment they left cinemas, and every single one of them is still here, still being watched, still being argued about, still meaning something to the people who saw them first. Is there one here you think the critics actually got right? One that you think genuinely does not deserve its cult status? Drop it in the comments. We read every single one.